Hi, I'm Cleo. The day my mother told me to give up my room, for her stepdaughter, I was still living there. She pointed to the floor and said, "Sleep there, until you figure life out." I didn't cry. I didn't beg, but somewhere between the insult and the silence, something in me shut off. I just left, with nothing. But what I built next faces their window, every single day. Do they regret it? Maybe. But they'll never say it out loud. What would you have done? Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment, we'd love to know. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Cardboard. Damp, dusty cardboard that didn't belong to me. I stood frozen in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, staring at a stack of boxes labeled Romy sweaters, Romy's photos, do not bend. The boxes sat on my old desk. My dresser drawers were half open and empty, like someone had packed up my life without telling me. I dropped my school tote near the door, still in my work shirt and lanyard from the middle school where I subbed. The Florida sun hadn't even set yet. My shoes were still warm from the parking lot. I backed out of the room and called down the hallway. "Mom?" She was already there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable, like she'd been rehearsing this moment. "I didn't know Romy was visiting," I said, my voice catching. "She's staying for a few days?" Her answer was calm, measured, practiced. "She's not visiting. Romy's moving in." A pause. "She's taking the room." I blinked. "I'm still living in that room." "You're not a child anymore, Cleo. It's time Romy had space to grow." Grow into what? I wanted to ask. She was 22, she had Instagram partnerships and pink designer luggage. What she needed wasn't space, it was consequences. "I pay rent," I said quietly. "I buy groceries, I cover the internet bill." Mom waved a hand, dismissing it all like dust on a countertop. "And you'll still be welcome here while you figure things out. Couch or floor, whatever you're comfortable with." She said it with a softness that felt more cruel than if she'd shouted. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, barefoot on the wood floor, my keys still dangling from my fingers, trying to process that I'd just been evicted from my own space by a girl who'd been in this family for less than 2 years. As if on cue, Romy strutted into the hallway behind her, dragging a roller bag. Her oversized sunglasses were still perched on her head. She looked at me, gave a single blink, then grinned. "Oh, don't worry, I'll make sure it still smells like you in there," she laughed, tossing her purse onto my bed. I heard the neighbor's screen door squeak. Mrs. Leona stood awkwardly on her porch, pretending to check her hanging ferns while watching the chaos unfold. I tried not to meet her eyes. I swallowed hard. My body stayed upright, but everything inside me began to tilt. Later that night, after the front door had closed and the house settled into silence, I sat on the living room carpet beside my duffel bag. The fan buzzed. I kept the lights off. I remembered the $3,800 I loaned my mom last year when she said the roof repairs had gone over budget. She never paid it back. She never even said thank you. And then the memory that always stung hardest. At a church gathering last fall, I overheard her say to Sister Maybell, "Cleo just can't seem to get her act together. Bless her heart." They laughed. I stood behind a curtain with my paper plate of banana pudding and swallowed it like gravel. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not rage, not pity. Just the slow erosion of whatever faith I had that this house still counted me as family. By midnight, I quietly packed the essentials into one bag. I didn't slam doors or write notes. I just slipped out. The night air was thick and warm. I slid behind the wheel of my old Honda Civic and drove 2 blocks down, then looped back. I parked across the street from the house, engine off, headlights dark. I reclined the seat and curled up with my purse as a pillow. The upholstery still smelled like lavender from my classroom spray. By morning, the windows were fogged. Sprinklers hissed from the lawn. I cracked the window to breathe. Through the mist, I saw Romy laughing in the kitchen. Her reflection moved past the window, holding my mug. I turned my head the other way. Across the street, the house next door had a new sign, "For sale." It wobbled slightly in the breeze, like it had been hammered in just yesterday. White post, red letters. I stared at it for a long time. Something inside me didn't harden. It clarified. I wasn't angry. I wasn't out for revenge. But if they wanted me gone, they should have been more careful about what I'd see next. The engine hummed low beneath me, but I didn't turn it off just yet. I sat there a moment longer in the shadows outside the only house I'd ever called home, until last week. From this spot I could still hear the laughter inside. Romy's cackling burst loudest, and I could still see the porch light flickering above the door like it didn't quite know whether to keep me or let me go. But that flicker, that hesitation, it didn't matter anymore. The next morning, I woke up not to a sunrise, but to creaking floorboards and the soft grunt of an old man shifting his knees downstairs. Mr. Hal had warned me the guest room was small, and he wasn't lying. It barely fit the twin bed, a wobbly dresser, and a nightstand with a chipped lamp that clicked 3 times before staying on. But the window had a view I hadn't expected. From that window I could see my old backyard, not metaphorically, literally. I blinked a few times, still groggy from another night of stiff sleep. Outside, Romy was stretching into a yoga pose, her Bluetooth speaker thumping something loud and poppy that didn't fit the stillness of the morning. She wore my old college hoodie like it had always been hers, arms raised to the sun like a scene from a commercial. A few feet away, my mother sat in a robe on a lawn chair with her coffee, face tilted up like someone finally at peace. Peaceful, after pushing me out like bad air. I pulled the curtain back slowly and let it fall, cutting off the view. But not before that moment lodged itself somewhere between my ribs. That afternoon, I helped Mr. Hal with his grocery bags, shared a quiet lunch, and politely listened to his updates about blood pressure, the raccoon that broke into his shed, and his daughter who never called anymore. He didn't ask why I'd suddenly needed a place to stay. And I didn't offer it. But that night was different. The scent of barbecue drifted through the open guest room window just after 6 p.m. I glanced up from my notepad, trying to organize a job search plan, when I heard folding chairs scraping against cement and a burst of music echo from next door. I stood, pulled the curtain just an inch, and watched. There were lights strung above the backyard like it was a wedding. 2 long tables lined with dishes I recognized from the old garage, platters that hadn't been used since our family reunion 6 years ago. People started trickling in. Faces I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, all of them hugging and laughing like nothing had ever cracked. I saw my cousin Harper. She once cried on my couch over her divorce. I saw Aunt Leslie, the one who borrowed my blender and never gave it back, and Uncle Dean, who used to call me kiddo and slip me 20s at birthdays. They all smiled. They all clinked glasses, and not one of them looked my way. From the patio, Romy stood with a wine glass held high. "Here's to fresh chapters," she said loudly. "And rightful space," my mother clapped. Actually clapped. Someone near the grill muttered, "Didn't she finally move out?" I didn't flinch, not then, but something folded inward and didn't unfold again. I closed the curtain and sat on the bed. My chest felt tight, not heavy, just tighter than it had earlier. I reached for the small notebook I kept near the lamp and flipped to a page I hadn't looked at in months. A summer camp receipt, paid with my bonus that year, when Romy's father couldn't cover it. I'd filled out the forms, packed her lunches, even drove the hour-round trip for 2 weeks straight. I'd helped braid her hair one morning when her own mom forgot to call, and I was the one who stayed up with her when she had that nightmare about being left behind at a gas station. 2 years. I didn't just share a home with her. I helped raise her. Now she stood in my old room, visible from this very window, painting the walls yellow. Bright, sunlit yellow. A soft thud drew my attention. I leaned toward the window again. She'd tossed something out. It hit the edge of the trash bin near the fence. My stuffed elephant. I'd had that since I was 5. Didn't even make it to the donation box, straight to the garbage. I didn't cry, but my hands gripped the windowsill so tight the wood creaked. The next morning, Mr. Hal was rummaging in the kitchen, pouring instant coffee into mismatched mugs. "You're up early," he said without looking. "Couldn't sleep," I answered, rubbing the back of my neck. He nodded toward the screen door. "Want to see something?" We stepped out into the side yard, a shaded patch between his house and the one directly next to my mother's. Overgrown grass brushed my calves, and the air smelled faintly of damp wood and citrus. "That one there," he pointed, "belonged to my sister. She passed last year. It's been sitting ever since." I followed his gaze. A pale blue house, single story, shutter paint peeling, gutters sagging. But the bones looked good, familiar. I realized I'd passed it 1,000 times growing up, never once thinking it could be mine. "Probate's been quiet," he said. "I'm too old to manage it, but if you're serious, I could let you take over the file before the city steps in. You just need to handle it quietly. You got some money saved, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared. It was the lot right next to my mother's. My old window would now face me. Later that afternoon, I walked through the place. No furniture, just echoes. The fridge was unplugged, and a thin crack split the kitchen tile like an old scar. But the light in the front room was soft and golden. And when I opened the side blinds, there it was. That same view of my childhood backyard, but now from my own line of sight. My name on a deed instead of a door frame. I didn't tell Mr. Hal anything at first. I just thanked him for the tour and went back inside. That evening, I sat on the porch steps until the sun dipped behind the palms and the air cooled enough to breathe again. Then I stood, brushed off my jeans, and drove down to the title office. It wasn't fancy, just a converted home with a secretary who offered me a wrapped butterscotch from her purse. I signed the papers without fanfare. No big speech, no announcement. I used the savings I'd once planned for Georgia, and just like that, I had an address. Not a room, a house. That night, after a quick trip to the hardware store for a lamp and a folding chair, I unlocked the door with my own key. There was no ceremony, just the quiet hum of my footsteps as I walked to the front room, plugged in the lamp, and turned it on. Warm light spilled into the space, brushing against the blank walls like possibility. I stepped closer to the window. My mother's house sat still and lit, like nothing had changed. But then, a curtain moved. She was there, just for a second. She didn't look at me directly, but something in the way she paused, hand on the fabric, breath held. It was like she felt it, like somewhere deep inside, she knew. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let the moment settle between us, invisible but real. Then, slowly, she drew the curtain closed. I turned away, let the light stay on, and sat in the folding chair like it was a throne. "They took my room," I whispered to no one. "I took the house." They took my room. I took the house. I didn't slam the front door. I didn't turn on all the lights to make a statement. I just existed in that quiet way people do when they know they're being watched, but refuse to give a performance. The next morning, I rolled up the sheet from my borrowed mattress and opened the only curtain in the front room, facing directly across the yard. From that angle, my mother's backyard looked the same as it did when I was 9, the same stone bird bath, the same crooked lemon tree that never produced a single lemon. Except now, Romy's yoga mat lay in the grass like it belonged there. Her Bluetooth speaker played something upbeat. My mother sat beside her in a lawn chair, robe cinched, holding her coffee like nothing in this world had changed, like I'd never lived there. Romy stretched with slow control, completely unbothered. I knew she saw me in the window. I didn't wave. Instead, I stepped outside. My yard was a mess. Patches of sand where grass had long given up, trash the wind blew in from the curb. But I had bought flower seeds, cheap ones, wildflowers that promised no fuss. I knelt down and started digging shallow rows, not because I thought they'd bloom into something magical, but because it gave me something to do with my hands. A few passing cars slowed down. This house had sat untouched for years, and now I was out front in old jeans, covered in dirt, planting color into the silence. By nightfall, I'd made a little progress. Nothing remarkable. Just a narrow band along the walkway, enough to make it look like someone lived here now. The next day, I was sipping water by the screen door when I heard the bell. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, she was standing there. My mother. She had on lipstick, just enough to look composed, but her eyes told another story. She glanced over my shoulder into the house, her gaze flicking past the bare walls and folding chair. She didn't say hello, just, "What exactly are you trying to prove?" I leaned lightly against the doorframe, steady. "I'm not trying to prove anything." "This is childish," she snapped. "Planting flowers like it's some kind of message, living here right next to us?" "You said I needed to figure things out on my own." I kept my tone even. "That's what I'm doing." She shifted her stance. "Romy's upset. She feels unsettled, like you're lurking." There it was. That word again. Unsettled. It always meant, "You're making us uncomfortable by simply existing where we didn't plan for you." I looked her dead in the eye. "Then don't look in my direction." I didn't wait for her reply. I closed the door. Quietly. That evening, I didn't eat much. My stomach was too tight. Instead, I paced. Not fast, just enough to wear a track in the floor and in my memory, because the last time something like this happened, I was 26. Back then, I'd just finished a business course online. Nothing fancy, but I was proud of it. My mom had this idea about opening a beauty salon. She was all in, but worried about the money, so I offered to co-invest. I had some savings. I'd even done some planning for her, helped find a lease, designed a logo on my laptop. She looked at me across our old kitchen table and said, "You're not business material, Cleo. You're better watching from the side." That stung more than I let on. She took Romy with her to the opening party, dressed her in a little apron like she was the proud mascot. A year later, the salon folded. But her words stayed. I pulled out my laptop, not to scroll, not to distract, but to start. I opened the city's planning portal and stared at the form for a long time before typing the first word. Permit application. Residential pool installation. I didn't need a pool, but I wanted one. A long, narrow lap pool, the kind you see in magazines. Not flashy, just deliberate. I selected the layout, uploaded a simple sketch. It would face the back of my house, which meant it would also face the exact window that used to be mine, the one Romy had turned into her makeup mirror selfie spot. "No fence on the east side," I told the contractor over the phone the next morning. "Just open space. I want a clear line." He paused. HOA might have questions. I smiled faintly. Let them ask. By the third week, the whispers started. It's a small neighborhood, retired folks mostly. They talk. The sound of digging, then concrete mixing, had brought a few curious walkers past my driveway. Most just nodded politely. One afternoon, the HOA president, Mr. Tully, walked up. He wore the same khaki shorts and white sneakers he always did. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. "Just curious," he said, eyeing the plywood and stacked tiles. "You planning to rent this place out, or—" I wiped my hands on a rag. "I'm building peace. That's all." He didn't quite know what to make of that. Nodded once, then wandered off. Later that night, Romy posted something on Facebook. I don't follow her, but a friend from high school still does. She sent me a screenshot. It read, "Funny how toxic energy always finds a way to live next door. Guess some people need a pool to feel deep." I didn't reply, but I saved the screenshot. The next morning, I stepped out onto my unfinished deck. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the grass and sand. I could smell concrete dust in the air. In a few days, the pool would be finished. I looked across the yard. Romy's window was lit. I could see her faint silhouette behind the sheer curtain, moving, maybe getting ready for the day. The same window I used to sit by, curled up with a book, or watching storms roll in. Now it would reflect water, stillness, depth. They'd pushed me out of their frame. But I was still in the picture, and if I was going to be the shadow, I'd choose where it landed. By the time the contractor's truck rolled out of my driveway, kicking up a small trail of dust in the sunlight, I'd already set a glass of lemonade by the window and sat down with my back straight, watching the street like it was a stage. Across the way, my old home loomed in perfect symmetry. White trim, a recycled wreath from spring still on the door. The curtains upstairs stirred. I didn't need to guess who was behind them. I didn't flinch. The air felt unusually still the next morning. I headed outside with my gardening gloves to check the mulch around the flower bed near the mailbox, trying to keep my hands busy. That's when I noticed the envelope. It was clean, white, thick. A neat little seal at the corner that read, Sabal Glen HOA. I opened it right there by the curb. Dear resident, it began, because heaven forbid they use my name. This letter is a formal notice regarding concerns about the recent architectural modifications made to the property at my address. The positioning and reflective surface of the pool tiles, along with the lack of visual shielding from neighboring lots, may constitute a disruption to the neighborhood's visual harmony. They'd underlined visual harmony in bold, not a word about safety, nothing structural, just aesthetic disharmony. I read it again and again. It wasn't about the pool, it was about me. I folded the letter slowly and slipped it into my back pocket. Then I stood still for a long moment, hands on my hips, letting the wind press through the branches above. The sound of lawnmowers started humming a few houses down. Routine, calm, predictable. But something was off. That afternoon, after filling out a work order online and organizing receipts from the contractor's visit, I needed a break. I took a drive, just to clear my head. I turned down the street I knew I should avoid, the one that would take me right past the house I grew up in, and there she was, my mother, standing in the driveway with a tennis-visored woman who looked like she'd walked off a page from a catalog, polo shirt tucked just right, nails immaculately French-tipped. They were laughing, like old friends catching up. My mother's laugh, the one that usually only came out for church ladies or the cousin she was always trying to impress. Then it hit me. The woman was Mrs. Calloway, the wife of Edward Calloway, the HOA president. The letter, the tone, the language that reeked of something personal. Of course. This wasn't just nosy neighbors. It was her, using her connections to weaponize regulation in the same soft, saccharine tone she'd always used when she wanted to keep me in my place. I turned the car around before they could see me. My palms were tight around the steering wheel the whole way back. At home, I dropped my keys on the counter and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paperwork I'd printed earlier that week. Permits, zoning codes, architectural drafts. My mother's voice rang in my memory like a bell I couldn't unhear. You're too dramatic. Romy always knew how to carry herself with grace. You're better at support roles, sweetheart. Not everyone's meant to lead. And worst of all, don't embarrass the family. That last one came rushing back hard. Senior year of high school, the day I brought home the pamphlet for the dance scholarship audition. I was so proud, so lit up from the inside. She looked at it like it was garbage. This again? She said. Your sister got into college the normal way. Don't make a scene. This isn't for you. She never yelled, just clipped my wings with perfect diction and a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. But I wasn't 17 anymore, and I wasn't going to apologize for standing my ground, not in my home, not in my name. The next morning, I packed a folder with everything, copies of permits, renderings, and yes, the HOA letter, and headed to the city zoning office. It was already hot by 9 a.m., and my AC hadn't kicked in properly, so I showed up a little flushed, damp curls pulled into a bun. Inside, it was blessedly cold. A clerk directed me to Mr. Jensen, a man who looked like he'd been working that desk since the Carter administration, complete with a tie that hadn't seen daylight since the 90s. He read through the complaint with the kind of sigh only local government workers know how to give. Then he smirked. You're fine. They're trying to argue aesthetics? That's not enforceable unless there's a direct line in the HOA bylaws, which, judging from this, there isn't. He tapped the letter twice and slid it back to me. File an appeal. In writing. CC the city attorney. They'll back off once they realize you've done your homework. I thanked him, then walked slowly back to my car, feeling something I hadn't in a while. The calm that comes when you know you're not out of control. You're just choosing when to hit back. That evening, after changing into comfortable cotton shorts and tying my hair back, I opened my laptop and logged into the Sabal Glen Community Forum. I typed carefully, "To the board and concerned residents, I appreciate your attention to detail and care for the aesthetics of our community. I've verified with the city zoning office that my current plans are in full compliance with municipal code. Thank you again for your vigilance. Warmly, Cleo." I clicked post, then walked away to water the new lavender near the back fence. By the time I came back inside, there were already comments. The first was from Romy. "So you're building spite? Got it." I stared at it for a long moment, then replied with nothing but a quote from the city code section and a simple, "Sometimes silence cuts deeper than a monologue." I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and stood in the kitchen with the window cracked just enough to feel the night air. They taught me silence. I was just giving them a taste. The meeting ended, but I didn't move. Not right away, not until the chairs scraped back and the last person shuffled out with a whisper behind their breath. I sat there a few minutes longer, watching the empty space where they'd all just been, my mother's smug profile, Romy's sideways glances. I let the silence settle. They taught me silence. I was just giving them a taste. But taste wasn't enough. I wanted the whole table reset. And if they thought they could corner me in my own home with rules they bent behind curtains and smiles, they were about to find out I'd come prepared, not just with emotion but with ink, with dates, with signatures. 3 days later, I stood inside the crisp, cool office of Halberd and Stone. My lawyer, Ms. Halberd, wore that usual neutral beige with her sharp bob tucked just behind her ear. She had the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice. I liked that. She slid a folder across the table. "We'll formalize your ownership here, Cleo. Trust is already active. This just clarifies there are no other legal interests, no shared occupants, and no financial obligations tied to the property." I picked up the pen and signed, first page, then second. She watched me carefully. "HOA giving you trouble?" "They're getting creative," I said, flipping to the last page. "Well," she said with a half-smile, "now you're bulletproof. Just make sure the HOA and city both receive copies and CC the clerk. And Cleo?" I glanced up. "Don't reply emotionally. Just reply with documentation. People like this, they're counting on drama. Deny them the show." I nodded and slipped the documents into my leather folder. The only sound in the room was the soft click of the pen being capped. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, I was ready. The folding chairs in the rec room were already half filled when I stepped in. The overhead lights gave everyone a jaundiced glow, but it suited the mood. Romy was seated front row center, her hair coiled in a bun so tight it could have snapped. My mother sat beside her, legs crossed, whispering into Romy's ear like it was church and the sermon hadn't started yet. I chose a seat in the second row, far enough back to watch them squirm. The board began with landscaping updates and spring trash collection. I let it all wash past until the words "pool harmony concern" floated into the air. Mrs. Calloway, tennis white smile, pearls and all, read it like it pained her to say it out loud. There have been several complaints regarding the orientation and style of the new pool construction at 16 Arden Place. Allegedly, it disrupts the visual continuity of the block. "Allegedly?" I echoed, raising my hand. I'd like to respond. She hesitated, then nodded. Romy turned to glance at me like I'd spoken out of turn. I stood up slowly, unzipping my folder. "I've brought all necessary permits and approvals. First, stamped approval from Zoning and Building Department, dated prior to excavation. Second, results from acoustic tests showing compliance with HOA decibel limits. And third," I let the paper slide onto the table, face up, notarized and bearing my name. Declaration of trust ownership filed with the county. This property is held in my name alone. No liens, no co-owners. Per state regulation, aesthetic considerations from HOA are non-binding on trust-held properties unless structural violations are present. A silence swept the room. Mrs. Calloway's mouth hung slightly open as she scanned the sheet. Mr. Calloway shifted in his chair, his lips tightening. Then came the murmurs. 2 board members leaned over the table to whisper. One scribbled something, another rubbed his temple. But what broke the silence wasn't them. It was a voice from behind, firm, raspy. "I never filed a complaint." Everyone turned. Mr. Domingo, 3 houses down from mine, stood up. He looked tired, angry. "I never sent in anything, didn't even know there was a meeting about this." He stepped forward and pointed toward the board. "You said it came from me?" Mrs. Calloway blinked. "That's what was submitted under your name. Email form. Then someone used my name without asking." The board shifted like a wave had hit them. "We'll need to review that," Mr. Calloway said, voice tightening. "We'll check IP logs from the submission system." 10 minutes passed in an uncomfortable hush as the tech board member pulled up access logs on his tablet. His face hardened as he scrolled. "Complaint was submitted from IP registered to 18 Arden Place," he said, looking directly at Romy. My mother's hand froze on her purse strap. Romy started, then stopped. "I just wanted it to be peaceful. That pool? She put it there to make us look." "To make you look what?" I asked, my voice even. "Like you're not used to having me next door, not below you?" Romy's face turned a shade paler. "It felt intentional." "It was," I said. "Just not in the way you think." My mother stood without a word. She yanked Romy's handbag up from the floor and walked toward the exit, heels clipping with speed. Romy stayed frozen, blinking, lips parted like she didn't understand what just happened. I walked toward the front of the room, set my card on the board's table. It read only one thing beneath my name: architect. Then I turned without fanfare, collected my folder, and walked out. "Let them pick up the pieces." She stole my room. I reclaimed the blueprint. And just like that, it stopped being about them. Not about making them see what they did, not about getting a seat at their table. Somewhere between that boardroom and the look on Romy's face when Mr. Domingo exposed her, I realized I didn't need their acknowledgement. I needed control over my space, my name, my peace. So I woke up the following Saturday with a plan to power wash the south fence line and repaint it before the next inspection. But when I stepped outside, my breath caught in my throat. There it was. My new cedar fencing, stained and split. A jagged line ran along the base where someone had taken what looked like a crowbar to 3 of the bottom planks. Red spray paint, too, across the slats in crude, streaky letters. "This isn't yours." For a full minute, I just stood there. The sun wasn't even all the way up. The air was still damp with morning dew, and the scent of wood shavings from the recent installation still lingered. But now it was layered with something sour. Intent. I checked the security camera tucked under the eave. Footage was clear, mostly. At 3:14 a.m., a figure in a hoodie paced the sidewalk near my house. Gloves, dark clothes, no direct touch, no clear face. But that slow back-and-forth gait? Romy. She had this little bounce in her stride, a tell she'd picked up from dance classes back in junior high. Even under poor lighting, I recognized it. I forwarded the footage to the HOA with a simple request: investigation. Their reply came before noon. "We reviewed the footage. Due to the lack of direct evidence, we are unable to act on this matter." Typical. By the time I finished reading it, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing there, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a sermon. "Well," she said, glancing past me toward the backyard, "maybe don't build things you can't protect." I didn't answer, not with words. I closed the door slowly and walked straight to the storage closet in the hall. I was done playing defense. 2 days later, I was halfway through a zoning application when a white truck pulled into the driveway. I stepped outside to find a man in uniform approaching the side gate with a clipboard. Cleo Malden? Yes? Fire Marshal's office. We received an anonymous tip about potential fire hazards, specifically combustible material near your pool equipment. I blinked. I don't even keep leaves back there. Mind if we take a look? I led him through the side path to the pool pump. Nothing was out of place. Cords tied up, no dry brush, even the mulch was damp. He checked boxes off his clipboard, nodded along, didn't say much. After a long pause, he sighed. Everything looks clean. Still, per protocol, we have to issue a citation for investigative resources. $185, it's not a fine, more like a service fee. Right. As I signed the receipt, I glanced up at the second-story window across the property line. Romy's curtain twitched. And there it was again. That smirk, like she'd just played the cleverest move on the board and wanted to see if I'd retaliate. I didn't. Not that day. That night, I pulled out the old blueprints of the house. I'd kept them stored in a weatherproof bin marked Personal Archives, tucked into the crawl space behind my studio, dusty but dry. As I flipped through the rolled sheets, something slipped out and fluttered to the ground. A photo, old and slightly curled at the corners. I picked it up gently. It was me, maybe 3 years old, sitting cross-legged on a carpeted floor, one hand in a jar of crayons, the other holding a plush bunny by the ear. The walls behind me were painted sky blue and the ceiling above, dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars, but it was the back that caught my breath. In faded black ink, in the careful print I hadn't seen in decades, was a line. Your room is your world. No one gets to take it from you. Dad. Not stepdad. Not Harold. My real father. The one whose laugh lived in my memory like a warm beam of sunlight. The one who taught me how to fold paper airplanes and draw windows in elevation view. A wave of memory swept through me. I could see him, crouched beside me on the carpet, helping me stick those glow stars to the ceiling. You want the Big Dipper over the bed? He'd asked. No, over the door, so I know where to go if I wake up scared. He smiled, brushed my hair back, and said, Then that's where it'll go. I must have stared at that photo for half an hour. Then, slowly, I got up, walked it to the printer, scanned it, reprinted a copy. The original went back into a protective sleeve. The copy? I framed it and set it on the shelf behind my drafting desk, right at eye level, where I could see it every morning before I sketched, before I drew lines that meant something. She thought she could erase me, I whispered, but I was carved into the foundation. The next few days I kept to myself, didn't attend the HOA walkthrough, didn't respond to the passive-aggressive email about residents who do not attend being seen as less invested in community standards. Instead, I made coffee, sat at my desk, read through city zoning regulations like they were scripture, minimum setback requirements, noise complaint thresholds, ordinance exceptions for single-title properties in legacy residential zones. I highlighted passages, annotated clauses, opened a second screen and typed notes as if I were prepping for court, which, in a way, I was. Then I composed an email, plain subject line, no emotion in the body, just bullet points. Recipient, Wallace and Birch Investigative Services. Subject, need background pull, stepmother and Romy Malden. I hovered over the send button for a second. My finger didn't tremble. I clicked. The morning air still held a trace of last night's chill as I stepped onto the back patio, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the spot where the new fence had stood proud just a week ago. Now, one of the panels leaned awkwardly inward, bolts clearly loosened, not worn. I hadn't fixed it yet, not because I couldn't, but because I wanted her to see it too, to know I saw through the act. Just as I turned to head back inside, a knock sounded from the front door. Not loud, gentle, like someone unsure if they should be there. I opened it to find Miss Caldwell standing on the porch in her housecoat and orthopedic sandals. Her silvery gray hair was swept back, and she held a tiny brown envelope in her left hand. "I've seen what they're doing," she said softly. eyes firm but kind. Thought this might help. She didn't wait for an answer, just placed the envelope in my hand, nodded, and turned to go. Inside, I peeled the flap open to find a USB drive, small and plain. I plugged it into my laptop, uncertain what I was even looking for. The footage played without fanfare. There, clear as day, was Romy, slinking around the south end of my yard in oversized sunglasses and gloves, crouching by the fence post. She glanced over her shoulder twice, then pulled out a wrench from her oversized tote and began loosening the bolts at the hinge. Not in a hurry. Not careless. Precise. Like she'd done it before. The second clip picked up in a brighter setting. Outside the HOA clubhouse. She was speaking to a man I recognized from the last board meeting. "Honestly, it's disturbing," she said, voice syrupy. "She's unstable. She threw paint at her own fence to get sympathy." I closed the laptop slowly. My hand didn't tremble. Not anymore. There wasn't shock this time, just a hollow calm, like something had clicked fully into place. And suddenly, I knew what needed to be done. 2 days later, I walked into the monthly HOA meeting like someone who hadn't been personally humiliated in the same room weeks before. I didn't RSVP. I didn't announce anything in the Facebook group. I just showed up, signed in under homeowner rights, and waited for the end of the regular agenda. When the chair asked if there was any additional business, I stood. "I'd like to share something with the board," I said evenly. The room quieted. A few heads turned. Romy, seated 2 rows ahead, went stiff. I walked to the projector stand, plugged in the USB, and hit play. The first clip drew gasps. The second clip, Romy's voice implying I'd staged my own vandalism, elicited something deeper. An embarrassed silence. One board member, a balding man with thick glasses, muttered, "We were misled." Romy didn't say a word. Her face had gone ashen, her mouth slightly open like she wanted to object but knew better. My mother sat beside her, arms folded tight across her chest, eyes locked forward, refusing to look at me. When the video ended, I spoke once more. "I came here weeks ago and asked for fairness. I was denied because I had no proof. Now I do." The board conferred briefly. The head of the committee stood. "On behalf of the HOA, Ms. Malden, we apologize. Effective immediately, all prior citations against you are void. We'll also be reviewing how anonymous claims are handled going forward." I nodded, collected my things, and walked out. Past Romy, who didn't lift her head. Past my mother, whose fingers tightened around her purse but offered no glance. No word. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood and the fire pit's first small flames began to curl in the breeze, I heard the side gate creak open. I didn't turn. The footsteps were too familiar. I let her sit beside me in silence for a full minute. "It was never about hurting you," my mother finally said, her voice barely above the wind. I stared at the flames. "It wasn't? You've always bounced back, Cleo. You were the strong one. Romy needs more help." I blinked, let her words settle in, let them breathe. "So you gave her my space, my savings, my name, because you thought I'd survive it?" She didn't argue, she simply said, "Yes." And somehow, that cut deeper than any scream. No drama, no crying. Just a small, dry ache in my chest where the last hope of fairness had lived. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We sat there another minute in that hollow quiet before she stood and walked away, heels crunching softly against the stone. When she left, I walked inside and opened the drawer of my writing desk, pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I didn't address it to her. I didn't even use her name. It started with, "You are not disposable, not a placeholder, not the floor they wipe their feet on." I kept writing until the fire outside burned low and my hand ached. The next morning, I changed the lock on the side gate between our yards. No drama, no note, just silence and a new bolt. Then I filed the permit with the city. A sculpture garden. Nothing tall, just enough. A winding path of steel and stone and native plants that would rise between our homes like a quiet wall. A gallery of resilience, made not to impress, but to remind. A week later, as the crew began measuring the first outlines of the plot, I stood by the kitchen window with my coffee, watching Romy's curtain twitch ever so slightly. Let her watch. Let her look out the window and see what she tried to bury. The dust hadn't even settled on the amended HOA paperwork before the next hit came. 3 days after the meeting, the same day the contractors were scheduled to break ground on the sculpture garden, I found a folded envelope taped to my front door. No return address, just the city seal and a single line typed on the front: permit hold due to property line dispute. I stood on the porch for a long time, just holding it. My hands didn't shake and I didn't pace. I just read the words, once, twice. Then I opened it. Anonymous submission, it claimed. But the phrasing? The bitter tone beneath the faux concerned language? I'd heard it 100 times in my life. The use of irresponsible renovations and potential disruption to neighborhood cohesion could have been lifted word for word from one of Romy's old college essays. That self-righteous rhythm was hers. Always had been. She wasn't trying to win anymore, she was just trying to slow me down, but it wouldn't work. I walked back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and opened the file cabinet under my desk. The label on the folder was simple: Property, Original. I flipped through old receipts, the tax assessment when I first took ownership, a photocopy of the deed. It was complete, but not deep. I'd need more than a surface-level document to clear this up now. So I grabbed my keys, tossed a protein bar into my bag, and headed downtown, to the city archives. It was late morning by the time I arrived. The building was quiet, the kind of government hush that smells like dust and old coffee. A woman at the counter pointed me toward the records division, and after signing a few forms and showing ID, I was led into a back room where everything felt older than it should have. I gave them my parcel number, my name, and sat down while they pulled the file. A young man handed me a thick binder, and I opened it with a click. The pages told a longer story than I expected. Originally, the house had been purchased by both my parents, in joint tenancy. I remembered hearing that once as a child, Dad saying something about equal say, equal share. They'd built it when Romy was a baby, when the trees were shorter, the fence newer, the siding still pale. I kept flipping. The change came 6 months after Dad's heart attack. His name? Gone. No probate. No mention of a will. Just an amended deed, signed by one person. My mother. Her signature stared back at me. Neat. Almost elegant. I traced it with my finger, not really touching the page, just hovering. It wasn't just the act that stunned me, it was the certainty, the quiet finality of it, like he never existed, like she rewrote history while we were still grieving. She didn't even contest his half. She simply claimed it. I closed the binder carefully and thanked the staff. The drive home was silent. No music, no news. Just the sound of the tires against the road and my mind quietly ticking through next steps. Back at home, I called Ms. Halberd. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her what I found, she didn't sound surprised, just focused. Technically, she said, if there was no will and no probate, that's an open door for retroactive fraud, especially if it directly affected inheritance and property rights. I don't want the house, I said. Not even half. There was a pause. I just want the truth. On paper. In the record. That he was there, that I was his daughter, that she didn't erase both. Ms. Halberd didn't ask if I was sure. She knew me well enough by now. I'll get started on the filing, she said. Expect a notice in a few weeks. And Cleo? Yes? Some things deserve to be remembered legally, not just emotionally. After we hung up, I sat at the dining table and stared out the window toward the side yard. The fence still stood between our properties. Her window, my mother's kitchen, faced the same view. I wondered if she ever looked through it, or if she, too, avoided it now, like a mirror cracked too long ago to repair. That evening, when the sky turned lavender and the shadows stretched low, I walked next door, knocked gently on Ms. Caldwell's door. She opened it with a soft smile, and I held up 2 cans of iced tea. We sat on her porch, watching the early stars peek through. "Thank you again," I said. meaning it more now than I even had at the HOA meeting. She took a sip, then rested her can against the armrest. "You know," she said, "when my husband passed, they told me to move, said the house would be too much for me alone. But I told them, I'm not just staying here, I'm keeping the story of our life here." I nodded. The air was cool, but still. "You're not just fixing a yard," she added. "You're restoring your name." That stopped me. I looked down at my hands, the small callus forming on my palm from hauling dirt and digging holes, my fingertips faintly ink-stained from sketching sculpture designs. "I'm tired," I said quietly, "of being someone they rewrote. Over and over." She didn't answer right away, just reached over and patted my hand. "Then let them read the truth." Construction began 2 days later. I stood in the yard with the contractors that morning, explaining the layout I'd sketched. The fencing would remain, but inside, a winding gravel path would cut through a small cluster of steel and stone, each piece designed to echo silence, boundaries, and roots. Near the far edge, closest to the original garden my father once planted, there would be a centerpiece, a sculpture resembling two hands cradling an open book. The base would bear the quote I'd chosen, "Build where they tried to bury you." The men nodded, respectful but curious. One of them, a younger guy with paint on his overalls, asked gently, "Is it in memory of someone?" "Yes," I said. "In memory of someone who was supposed to still be here." As they began clearing space, leveling the earth, I returned inside and laid my father's photo next to my sketchpad, his face calm, eyes kind, the kind of man who brought quiet instead of noise. I touched the edge of the frame. I hadn't spoken aloud to it before, but now I did. "They tried to erase you," I whispered, "but I'm putting you back." The hum of machinery outside began rising, and I stood up, stronger somehow. This wasn't about revenge, it was restoration. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had proof, I had truth, I had a fence, and soon I'd have a garden filled with things they couldn't touch, not because it was too far, but because it was never theirs to begin with. The last thing I ever built in that house was myself. The quiet had a different sound that morning. Not absence, but presence. The kind of stillness that only settles when something truly ends. Light filtered across my hardwood floors, soft and golden, brushing against the arm of the chair where I sat holding a warm mug of chamomile. The smell of dried flowers and citrus rind filled the living room. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't watching the door. The knock came at 8:32, not a loud one, but insistent, like someone unsure if they were brave enough to ask, but desperate enough to try. I didn't need to peek out the window to guess. Still, I stood and stepped toward the foyer. My feet moved on instinct, not intention. The wood creaked beneath my heel as I paused just before the threshold, heartbeat steady. Through the peephole, I saw them. Romy. She looked wrecked, hair pulled back in a way that made her face look raw, pale, lips chapped. Her eyes were swollen, either from crying or from not sleeping. And my mother, not composed, not cold, just small, older than I remembered. Her hands clutched her purse like a shield. Romy clutched a thick folder. Its corners were dog-eared, like it had been held and reopened too many times in too few hours. I didn't need to see what was in it. I could already guess. Some half-baked plea wrapped in paperwork. One final try. They knocked again. I laid my hand on the doorknob. It was cool to the touch. Familiar. My thumb rested near the lock. I didn't turn it. I could hear Romy's voice through the door, muffled, broken. "Ode, please, we didn't know." I turned my face slightly and looked at the wood grain in front of me. Solid, steady. Then I stepped back, turned the lock with a quiet click, not to open, but to confirm. This door wouldn't move today. I didn't owe them anything, and silence? Sometimes it's the only answer that carries weight. I returned to the kitchen, lifted my mug, and took a long, slow sip. The tea was lukewarm by now. but the warmth I felt had nothing to do with it. Some stories don't end with apologies. Some don't even get explanations. They end when you stop opening the door. I stepped out onto the back patio, letting the screen door ease shut behind me. The sky was a calm, cottony blue, dotted with soft clouds that drifted without urgency. The air smelled of fresh soil and late spring jasmine. The contractors had come early. The frames were up, and several small sculptures stood in their places like quiet sentinels, unbothered, unmoved. A few yards over, Ms. Caldwell's grandkids ran around in circles, shrieking over a bubble wand someone had clearly figured out how to weaponize. Their laughter rose like wind chimes, free, loud, alive. I walked down the newly packed path between flower beds and paused in front of the sculpture I'd carved last fall, a twisting piece of driftwood and bronze molded together. Beneath it, a stone plaque was now fully set. It read, "Not the floor, not the spare, not the silence." I knelt for a moment to run my fingers across the etched words. My father would have liked that one. And in the stillness of that backyard, I could hear his voice again. Not out loud, but in memory. I was maybe 9, curled up in a fortress of pillows, sheets tucked over dining chairs. He had brought me a flashlight and told me it was the safest room in the world. "This space is yours," he'd said, setting the light down gently. "Don't ever shrink to fit someone else's comfort." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant, but I think I always carried it, even when I forgot I did. I whispered, "I didn't shrink, Daddy." I stood and dusted off my palms. The sculpture garden wasn't finished, but it was more than halfway there. The fences were upright. The layout was shaped. There was still work to do, but the vision had arrived. And I no longer needed anyone to see it with me. Back inside, I folded the mail, tidied a few stray papers, and checked the security cam out front. The car was gone. They hadn't left a note. I hadn't expected one. I walked to the front gate, adjusted the latch, and took a deep breath. The morning was quieter now. No footsteps, no knocking. Just the rustle of trees and a breeze that smelled faintly of honeysuckle and old bricks warming in the sun. I reached up and flipped the small metal sign that hung near the gate latch. Private property. The click it made wasn't loud, but it settled deep in my chest like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. They never said sorry. Maybe they never will. But here's what they don't get to rewrite. I've built more than just walls on this land. I've built peace, boundaries, identity. And that doesn't come with a key for anyone else. For the first time in decades, I wasn't chasing understanding. I wasn't hoping someone would finally see me or say what they should have said years ago. I had stopped knocking, and today, so had they. As I turned toward the house, the screen door creaked open behind me and thudded softly closed. I didn't look back. There was nothing left out there I needed to see. Inside, sunlight had spilled across the same spot on the floor where my father used to stand, holding blueprints and talking to himself like he was already building what hadn't existed yet. And I smiled, because I was doing the same thing now, and for once, I wasn't the one left outside.